all for coming. This is a terrific turnout. It's really nice to see so many people here. My name is Rachel, and I'm the gallery coordinator for Xchanges this year. I'm very pleased to present this show on Babel by Connie Morey. This exhibition is part of our 2012-2013 season, which is in its final stretch now with this show, and next month we have Paula Sebasta, and in April we have a high school art project. And we have a couple more exhibitions, and that takes us to the end of this season. And then we'll be starting with a brand new season this summer. And if any of you are interested in receiving updates on the exhibition, we have a sign-up list at the table where you can just put your name and your email address, and you can receive a monthly newsletter. Just wanted to make a couple of thank yous. One to Xchanges members who have helped out with this exhibition, and also a special thank you to the CRD, from whom we receive our funding to operate the gallery. Xchanges is a non-profit organization, and although we do receive funding, it doesn't cover the entire cost of what we do. And so if any of you are able or feel like contributing, we also have a little box, and are eternally grateful for any donations you'd like to make. We also have, I mentioned the newsletter, and yeah, on that note, just like to introduce and welcome Connie, who's going to talk about her work. She's an artist, instructor at ExhibitVic, and also a PhD candidate. So she's a colleague, but also a very dear friend, so very nice to have her.
Thanks, Rachel, and thank you everyone who came out tonight. It's great to see so many people here. That's a nice surprise. Before saying a few words about the work and talking about what I've been up to with that, I wanted to acknowledge a few people. And I think I view all endeavors as being sort of intricately collaborative, even though they often appear to be done by one person. And so I'd like to ask you to be a bit patient with me while I acknowledge all the people who were very intricate and collaborative with this work. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, the land on which Xchanges rest. I'd also like to say thanks to the CRD and to the folks at Xchanges who are an incredible community to be a part of. I feel very fortunate to be a part of this community. I'd like to make special thanks to Kate Seymour, who is the exhibition sponsor, and her and her son Dylan came out and helped with installing the exhibition, so thanks to her. I also wanted to thank the University of Victoria and Art Education, which is the area that I'm pursuing a PhD in, and also have been a sessional instructor there. And they also are a really great community to be a part of. I wanted to thank my family, that includes Ismail, who's here someplace, and he is largely responsible for the spread that's put on tonight. He worked very hard today making food. And Indra and Saleha, who are sources of inspiration. And I'd also like to thank my doctoral committee, which includes Bob Dalton, Mike Emmy, Klaus John, and David Blades. And I'd like to make special mention of Bob Dalton, who anybody who's had the pleasure of working with Bob Dalton knows that he is an incredible mentor. Look at that girl. An incredible mentor, and yeah, he has given the project on a whole the gift of humility, which I think is a really important gift for any project, particularly research. Research can always use a little bit of humility. I also wanted to thank the Drab Flips Crick group, which is a group that consists of Trish Ford and Troy Donnelly and Rachel Hellner, who have helped in sort of evolving the work and make special mention of Rachel, who's chatting with me right now. Hey, sweetie. And because she is a gigantic source of inspiration for me and a huge source of support. And I wanted to thank Jen Cador, Mitch Wright, Roby Liscombe, and Christine Clark for their support with the exhibition. And last, but especially not least, Karen Wilms, who's there behind the camera, and Regan Rasmussen, and Andrea Graffor, and Astrid Wright, who all generously agreed to help out with things tonight. So thank you for letting me have that moment to acknowledge everybody. So the work that's here tonight, I imagine that people are sort of coming from all different points of entering the work, and it's a part of the doctoral research that I've been doing at ExhibitVic. So my doctoral research has studio components and written components to it, and the work on a whole focuses on attempting to envision an ecological sense of imagination, whatever that means, through an adaptation of Jan Swicky's work, who is a West Coast philosopher and poet who does really great writing. And so the work that's here tonight is in the exhibition highlights the studio research component that I've been working on at ExhibitVic. And that research is largely grounded in ecology. And by ecology, I guess I don't so much mean the science of ecology, although that might be part of it as well. I'm really talking about how we are profoundly interdependent, and how we are also distinct in that we embody some type of difference as well. And when I've been thinking about ecology and what traditionally in Western culture, within that ecology, sort of where humans and where nature is, when I think about those things and how often traditionally they're seen as something that's separate, and I think of the threshold between human beings and nature, I think of one of those thresholds as animals. So in that human beings are animals and we are not animals. We are both of those things. So many of the things that are used to describe what a human being is in the Western tradition are things that set us apart from animals. And some of those things are things like tool use. There's a whole list of them. There's like a group of 30 that, or more. Things like tool use, the ability for abstract thought, in particular types of intelligence have been throughout history talked about in that way. Imagination, the use of complex language. So there's a number of different things. And I'm interested in human-animal relations because I see that as the threshold or the brink where we teeter over the edge of what has traditionally been known as the civilized world into that, what might be called wilderness or nature. So they're that sort of tricky threshold, I guess. I think that our relations with animals not only say something about our relations with other species, but how we see difference, how we deal with difference, whether that difference is difference with other species or cultural difference, gender difference, difference whether we see ourselves inside or outside of nature, so that difference with nature and difference within ourselves. So I see that, when I'm thinking about human-animal relations, about it in a much broader scope, that it says something more than just me with my cat. Although it also says that. There's a lot to say about my cat. She's lovely. So the title of the exhibition, as Rachel made mention of, is actually BA_BLE. And it is there's intentionally a blank left in the title, which causes people some concern or some uncomfortability because you're not quite sure what the heck do I do with that title, right? And so it's an imprecise title. It's an inarticulate title in some sense. So I was going to sort of interrupt for just 1 to 2 minutes. I wanted to interrupt my talk, and I wanted to invite everybody to participate in a 1 to 2 minute collaborative performance of making the title. And so what I'd like to ask you to do is I have some people who have some small cards that have, I'll show you what one of them looks like, that have letters on them. And with this, we're going to hand these cards out, one to each person. And with the card, I'm going to ask you to take the letter that's on the card and fill it in, fill the blank in. So this one has a P in it, so it might be, depending on your dialect and your accent, if you were me, it would probably be backful. So I'm going to ask you to take the card that you have and exchange it with someone. And at the point where you exchange it with someone, to say the word. And then you'll take that card that you get from someone else and exchange it with them. And at that point, construct the title with them. So I'd like to invite you for just a minute or two to participate in a collaborative performance of us constructing the title together. And we'll hand these out, and we'll start the performance with the clink of a wine glass, and we'll end the performance with the clink of a wine glass. So you'll need to listen for those. So if we could get people to hand out those cards, we'll make sure that everybody Is everyone ready? And I'm going to ask you to, during this time, only say the word that's on your card. Exchange, say the word, exchange, say the word. Okay? So, and when Script clinks the glass, we'll begin. To bring everybody back in, although I don't know that I have any tips. So I was hoping that by leaving the line blank, the underscore blank, or part of the title blank, that people would engage with the title in a much more participatory way, rather than reading it and having something that's sort of known. There would be an element of the unknown, and also people would engage with it in a much more playful and experiential way. And it makes sense with the work. I think as I talk, it'll make a bit more sense. And I also, by leaving it blank, I think in a way I'm acknowledging, one, the limits of my knowing, and also, two, the limits of human knowing. When we think about human-animal relations, and that there's certain limits to what we can know. So language in particular is really important for the exhibition. And as you look around, you see things like fur in mouth, or different elements that refer to sort of language, or titles that refer to language. And I think in Western culture, language has been one of those things that has been used as a marker to set us apart from other animals. So the work in the exhibition sort of plays with the thresholds between human and animal language, or humans as having language and animals as having what is often referred to as sound. So that is often a distinction. So it explores what you might say is the animality of language, or language as experience, or as participation, as a form of engagement with the world, rather than a precise objective tool to describe a world that's outside of us. It's much more of an experiential engagement with the world. And I wanted to read a lovely quote from, I think it's from Alice in the Looking Glass, actually, or Alice in Wonderland. And I think it helps to explain, or maybe not explain, but allude to something of this relationship between language of humans as having language and animals as having sound, and little people as having words. So, and this is the quote, a lovely quote. It says, "It is a very inconvenient habit of kittens," Alice had once made the remark, "that whatever you say to them, they always purr. If they would only purr for yes, or mew for no, or any rule of that sort," she had said, "so that one could keep up a conversation. But how can you talk with a person when they always say the same thing?" On this occasion, the kitten only purred, and it was impossible to guess whether it meant yes or no. So I'd like to talk about two works and mention a little bit about how they evolved. And I'm usually a bit hesitant. Anybody who's sort of either gone to school with me or been involved in a crit with me knows I'm usually quite hesitant to say too much about the work, because I think that it ends up in some way limiting it. I have one perspective, but you together have all these great perspectives that you bring to the work, and when you enter it on your own, those sort of collaboratively are much richer than all the things that I think about it. And another reason I'm reluctant is because I never see one thing in the work. There's also always multiple things, multiple layers or entanglements of thoughts sort of happening at once. So I hope when I talk about it that I can talk about it in a way that opens it up rather than pins the work down. So I'd like to talk about two pieces, and one of them is this piece here, which is titled Small Bird Trap, and it also has a subtitle that's titled Learning to Sing. And it's a collaborative work. It's evolved over a few years. So I finished this work a couple years ago, and then since then I've finished it a couple more times, and may finish it again after the exhibition. So it's changed over time. And I collaborated on this work with my mum and dad, so it's a particularly important piece to me. And I'm also fond of this work, I think, because it blurs the boundaries between craft and fine art, or Western fine art. And craft is a tradition which many of you may be familiar with, that encompasses things like work that is traditionally done by women in domestic settings, non-Western cultures, works that's done by non-Western cultures, and non-elite classes. And in the tradition of fine arts, craft has really played second fiddle to fine arts. It's seen as a form of outsider art, you know, perhaps shifting within the last 20 years or so. And it's still, I think, you know, I recently went to a talk where it was, I think it's still seen as less critically engaged, even though there are numerous occasions where craft is incredibly socially and politically engaged, and at times pointedly subversive, I think. So I'm interested in craft because I'm interested in the boundaries of difference and boundaries of inclusion and exclusion. Who is included and who is excluded, which is very similar to my thinking about why I'm interested in human-animal relations, because I'm interested in those boundaries of inclusion and exclusion. So instead of reading the work and telling you all the different things that I was thinking about, I wanted to read a quote that I came across when I first started making this work. And the quote is by Lucy Irigaray, and it's from a beautiful small essay that she wrote that is titled Animal Compassion. And in it she's talking about her childhood and her adult relation with animals, particularly with butterflies and with birds. So she says, the most constant companionship of my childhood, its greatest joys are bound to animals. To contemplate a flowering bush covered with fluttering butterflies moved me to ecstasy or something close. I later learned that the word papillion, butterfly, comes from the Greek word meaning soul. I would contemplate for hours those souls flying or resting in the Empyreum or some terrestrial paradise, nourishing themselves from the nectar of flowers and giving thanks by beating their wings. That spectacle brought me to a perception of what beatitude could be. Alas, I wasn't satisfied approaching beatitude such as it was offered to me in such a way. I wanted to appropriate it, a naive gesture to which I devoted any number of hours of my childhood. Impossible to measure the time dedicated to waiting for a butterfly to appear in the garden, the meadow, the forest, nor the patience spent waiting for it to alight, fly away, return, depart again, and stop finally on a beloved flower where my hand or a net would pluck it. What the butterfly would give me in happiness would vanish with this gesture, or almost. No doubt, the flight of the butterfly on the window put a little bit of lightness and joy into the house, but only briefly. How not to understand that it would be truly generous only when I contemplated it in a space appropriate to its life, to give thanks for what it let me perceive should have sufficed to perpetuate, indeed amplify, a joy to which capture put to an end. So what interests me about Irigary's writing in this essay in particular is the point where the threshold point where desire becomes dominance or nurturing becomes control. And I think that's a threshold point that we all, on individual levels, I know I negotiate it on a daily basis, and I think socially and politically we negotiate that point where desire, our relations with others, whatever those others are, whether they're animal others, cultural others, gendered others, difference in ourselves, that point where something, is nurturing and steps over into control, or is desire and steps over into dominance, is a very thin line. So that's what interests me in her work, and also a lot of what I was thinking about with this piece of Small Bird Trap, which has the potential to trap, but perhaps also has the potential to nurture and care for something as well. So there's one more piece that I'd like to talk about. I'm not going to make you stand for too much longer, but I'm just going to ask you to turn your bodies, and I'm going to come around to the cabinet over here. I'm going to show you the cabinet. So I wanted to just make briefly talk about this work, because it's a work that I spent a lot of time on. The title of the work, some of you may have noticed already, is Taxon Aphonia, and taxon etymologically comes from ordering or managing or the making of law, and aphonia is the loss of voice, so it's not having or losing a voice. And the piece consists of an altered library card catalog, as you can see, and 60 small sort of contemporary craft or small fiber-based sculptures that are inside the drawer. And this piece evolved over about a year. I worked on it. I purchased the cabinet, and then it sat in my studio, and I had an idea for how it was going to work, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one. So it took some time. And I started it by burning letters into the cabinet. So I got a pyrography kit and began to burn letters. And while I was burning them, I was thinking about a few different things. I was thinking about naming, and how naming can be used as something that is more a form of dominance, where it holds something into place, or it can be used something that opens something up. When we name something, that name can be used more metaphorically and open something up, or it can be used to pin it to pin it down like a definition. And I was also thinking about branding practices, how animals that are in a sense dominated through domestic practices are often branded as a sign of ownership. So I was thinking about that. And I was also thinking about language and the point where language becomes a pattern, so it's no longer precise. So I sort of played with how many letters to put on and at what point does it become a pattern for me. So I was thinking about those different things. And while I was working on it, I came across the sort of history of the word Homo sapien, which was almost a treasure to come across that history. It's like, oh, I never thought about that before. Because Homo sapien is something that in Western culture we almost think of it as a universal. This is what man is. Man is a Homo sapien, right? But I coming across sort of the history of that word made me realize how cultural it is and how new it is, that way of thinking. So it actually has only been a part of the Western tradition for about 250 years. Before that, we didn't refer to ourselves in that way, and in other cultures, they don't refer to themselves in that way. And Homo sapien means man, the wise. So I wanted to read, I have a small book that I made that accompanies this piece, and I just wanted to read a very short, you've been very patient with all my reading, a very short passage from here that gives some sort of a sense of what I was thinking about with this. So it says, "It has been said that I belong to the species Homo sapien, or that's the story oft told within Euro-American culture since Linnaeus coined the term in Systema Naturae some 250 years ago. The sculpting of the language of taxonomy shapes an image of man, the wise, whereby Homo refers to man and sapiens wise. It seems that as a human animal, and by my rite of passage into and through the world, I belong to a species that is particularly wise, or distinctively wise, or wise in some unique way worth mentioning, however you have it. Taxonomical language is not a neutral grammar, but rather a transmitter of cultural belief. In this sense, man the wise conveys a great deal about the cultural roots of my imposed sapienness, and repercussively in symbiosis about the relative asapienness of companion species. What then is meant by wisdom? By whom and how is it defined? And who is excluded from this politics of language?" So inside the cabinet, I've made a number of small sculptures that I see as others. They're small sculptures that embody difference. They're not human, they're not animal, they sort of look like they're parts of animals maybe, but they sort of teeter on that edge of difference, the difference that we see in others, in animals, in whatever that point of difference is, and sort of amplify it a little bit by being things that we can't really name. And with each one of these creatures in the drawer, I've named each of them with a name that includes the word sapien, so it includes the word wise. And I've done this sort of as a way of reclaiming wisdom beyond sort of anthropocentric boundaries or human-centered boundaries, to acknowledge that there are other views of the world that see things like intelligence and wisdom and imagination and complex language as not just things that are exclusively human possessions. So that's sort of some of my thinking about that. So I'd invite you to look inside, to open up the drawers and peek inside at those small bits of others inside there. I'd like to ask you not to pick up the others and move them out of the drawers, but please feel free to have a look inside, and also invite you to have a look at the book. And there's a couple of books that I've made up for the exhibition that are for sale if anybody's interested in those books. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you for being patient. And thank you so much for coming out. It's really great to share the evening with all of you.
So here we're going to keep it at 1 to 3. And the first day, week 3, we're going to get the prints.
Yeah, I promised myself to go to just for now.
All the materials are provided.
Oh, is that 225?
Just
turned in right now?